The envelope was cream-colored, thick, expensive, the kind you use when image matters more than intention. I saw it in the mailbox and somehow knew. My hands trembled as I opened it, not from excitement, but something closer to dread. Inside was a wedding invitation. My son's wedding. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, it read in elegant print. Just that. No mention of me, no and family, no Sylvia, just Mr. and Mrs. Johnson. That's when I knew exactly where I stood. I stared at the card, my eyes running over the gold leaf letters. Charles and Emily invite you to celebrate the marriage of their son, Daniel Johnson, to Miss Carolyn Brooks. I read it 3 times. My name didn't appear once. Not as a host, not as the groom's mother, not even in the return address. I sat down at the kitchen table, the invitation still open in front of me. I didn't touch my tea. The morning sun came through the window and landed in a neat square on the tablecloth. Dust floated in the air like it had nowhere else to be. Daniel was my only child. I had raised him on my own after his father died in a road accident when Daniel was 9. I'd worked at the local post office for 32 years, rising at 5, walking to work in the cold, sorting letters with aching hands. I sewed his Halloween costumes, packed his school lunches, stood in the rain at every soccer game. There were no grandparents, no uncles, just me and Daniel against the world. But over the years, the us had disappeared. It started slow. Calls became shorter, visits less frequent. After he met Caroline, things changed faster. She was polite, always polite, but there was a sharpness behind her eyes, a cool efficiency in how she handled people. And I became the person they sent cards to, the one they informed, not included, not invited in, just informed. I should have seen this coming, but nothing prepares you for being erased. I kept staring at the envelope. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson. I was neither Charles and Emily. I had never even met them. Never. Daniel never introduced me to Caroline's parents, and now they were the ones inviting people to my son's wedding, as if I were a footnote, or worse, a nuisance. The silence in the house thickened. I could hear the refrigerator hum, the ticking of the kitchen clock. I looked across the table. The empty chair used to belong to my late husband, Harold. He would have said something sharp. Not even your name, he'd say. Well, that settles it. But Harold wasn't here. Just me. Me and a heavy cream-colored card that told me I no longer had a seat at the table. And yet, I wasn't angry. Not yet. I was something quieter, heavier. I was done pretending. I left the invitation on the table and walked to the window. Outside, the neighbor's dog barked at nothing in particular, and someone down the block was trimming hedges. The world didn't care that I'd just been told, with thick stationery and gold embossing, that I was no longer truly part of my son's life. The memory came uninvited, like most of them do. Daniel, 10 years old, standing in our tiny kitchen with both arms wrapped around my waist, his face pressed to my apron. When I get rich, Mama, I'm going to buy you a big house and make you breakfast every morning. I'd laughed. I don't need a big house, I told him. Just don't forget me when you get rich. He promised, swore on his favorite comic book. He didn't get rich, not in the way people mean it. But he did well. IT Consulting, his own firm now. Caroline worked in finance, sleek and always moving, like a swan gliding over water while her feet worked furiously beneath the surface. She never said a cruel word to me. She didn't need to. It was her silences that said it all. The way she passed over me in conversation, how she smiled thinly when I brought pie to their place, how my Christmas gifts were left unopened on the hallway table until I asked about them. I had tried. Oh, I had tried. When they bought their first home, I offered to help. Caroline thanked me with a tone that suggested I shouldn't have. When Daniel called less, I filled the gap with cards, small gifts, voicemails that rarely got a reply. I swallowed every slight like a bitter pill. But this was the first time the insult had come with a wax seal. I picked up the envelope again, rereading the words as if they might shift under my stare. But they didn't. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson. Not even the Johnson family, just Charles and Emily, Caroline's parents, as if they had raised him, as if I didn't exist. I thought of calling Daniel, just to ask, just to see how he'd explain it. But what would I say? That I needed permission to feel like his mother again? No. Instead, I called Grace. She answered on the third ring, her voice warm and steady, the kind of voice you only earn by surviving enough storms. "Sylvia? Do you have a minute?" I asked. "Of course I do," she said, without hesitation. "You sound like you've just been slapped." I didn't cry. Not yet. I just said, "I got a wedding invitation for Daniel." Grace was quiet for a moment. "And?" It wasn't addressed to me. Another pause. Then, "Ah, I see." We didn't need to explain. Grace had 2 sons, both of whom lived 3 states away and hadn't visited in 5 years. She knew the language of omission. I heard her sigh. "You need to look at the paperwork." "What paperwork?" "The house," she said. "The one they're having the wedding in. It's yours, isn't it?" I blinked. "I don't know. It was bought in both our names, Harold and I, back in '92. The lake property." "That's where they're hosting it, isn't it?" "Yes." "How did you—" She didn't answer that, just said, "You should find the deed before someone else pretends it's theirs." I sat very still. The envelope slid out of my lap and onto the floor. She was right. Harold and I had bought that cabin when Daniel was in college. It had been our dream, our little piece of quiet. And after Harold died, I hadn't thought much about it. Daniel had asked to use it a few times. Caroline mentioned once that she was helping with some renovations, but I never signed anything, never sold it, never gave it up. I just trusted. "Sylvia," Grace said gently, "you don't have to make a scene, but you do have a right to be seen." And for the first time in a long while, I felt something stir in me. Not grief, not shame, resolve. The folder was where I'd left it 20 years ago. Bottom drawer, back of the cabinet, beneath old tax returns and my wedding certificate. It smelled like paper should. Old, a little bitter, a little like time. I carried it to the table, the invitation still lying there like a dare. The lake house had been Harold's idea. "One day," he'd said, "we'll need somewhere to disappear." He meant it as a joke, but I'd loved the place from the first visit. The creaky dock, the smell of pine, the hush of mornings when mist hovered above the water like a secret. Daniel had learned to fish there, cried the first time he touched a worm. I opened the folder with careful hands. There it was. The deed. Margaret Sylvia Johnson, Harold James Johnson. Joint ownership with survivorship rights. Harold had died in 2006, which meant the property was mine. Legally, fully, irrevocably. I sat back in my chair. The kitchen clock ticked behind me. Mine. The paperwork was old, yellowed in places, but the stamp was clear. County office, filed, notarized. No mention of Daniel. No mention of Caroline. Just me and Harold. So why had they planned a wedding there? Without asking? without even acknowledging me. Because I hadn't said no. Not once. Not ever. Grace's voice echoed in my head. You have the right to be seen. I reached for my reading glasses and leafed through the rest of the documents. A water bill still arriving in my name. Property tax forms, auto-paid through my account. I had let it all continue without thinking, because what was there to question? Daniel had said they just needed a place to get away from the city sometimes. Caroline called it charming. I let them repaint the walls, install a new stove. I even sent money when they said the roof needed work. I never asked what for. I wanted to stay close. That thought hit me harder than expected. All those years, all those silences, and I'd still been hoping for proximity. I hadn't been protecting myself. I'd been bargaining, quietly, politely, invisibly. If I gave enough, surely I would still matter. And now they were planning a wedding there, in my home, with my money, without my name. I closed the folder and set it aside. There was another drawer, the one with the family albums. I hadn't opened it in a while, but I knew exactly what I was looking for. Not photos, though there were plenty. What I wanted was the envelope tucked behind the second album, the one Harold labeled in his blocky handwriting, "In case of trouble." Inside were the names of two people, our old lawyer and a younger man Harold had trusted toward the end, someone who helped manage the estate after Harold's health declined. I picked up the phone and dialed. A woman's voice answered. Reynolds & Co., this is April. Hello, April. My name is Sylvia Johnson. I'd like to speak with Thomas Coe, if he's available. She paused. Let me check, Mrs. Johnson. One moment, please. Coe's voice came on the line a minute later. Warm, professional. Mrs. Johnson, it's been a while. Yes, I said quietly, and I'm afraid it's time to catch up. I explained the situation without drama, without venom. Just the facts. A property still legally mine. A wedding being planned without permission. A mother left off the invitation list. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, there was a pause. Mrs. Johnson, he said carefully, would you like to establish your standing formally? I understood the question. It meant, do you want to make this legal? No, I said. Not yet. I just want to understand my rights. Understood. I can pull the property file today and confirm what you already have. If it's titled solely to you, any event held there requires your approval. I assume there's no lease, no agreement in place? No, I said. Nothing in writing. All right. Then by law, they need your consent. I felt something shift inside me. Not victory, not yet, but a kind of quiet validation. Thank you, I said. One more thing, he added. If anyone tries to claim otherwise, let me know. We can issue a formal notice. I hung up the phone and looked again at the invitation. Then I took out a pen and wrote something across the envelope in steady, deliberate script. Return to sender. Addressee unknown. That night, I slept with the folder on my nightstand. I didn't expect to. The anger had a sharpness that usually kept me awake. But there was something about having the truth close, something solid and notarized in a world that had lately felt full of disappearing. My name was still on something that mattered, and that gave me rest. In the morning, I made coffee like always, fed the cat, watered the dying fern in the window. Everything moved the same way it always had, except me. There was a stillness inside me now, the kind that doesn't come from defeat, but from resolve. I wasn't going to confront anyone. Not yet. Not over the phone, not in a letter. Not in a text that would go unread or be passed between them like a joke. No, I was going to see it for myself. The drive to the lake house took 42 minutes. I hadn't been in almost a year. They'd told me it was under renovations for a long while. Said it wasn't safe. Said they were fixing the dock, redoing the bathroom, adding heating. "We'll invite you soon, Sylvia," Caroline had promised with that polished smile. "Once it's all done and comfortable for you." I'd believed her. Of course I had. The trees thinned as I neared the turnoff, and soon the water came into view, wide, calm, the way Harold used to describe it. Like a secret nobody's spoiled yet. The gravel crunched beneath my tires. I rolled down the window. The air still smelled of pine and damp leaves. But the house? The house had changed. They'd painted it white, bleached and sterile, with black shutters and a new porch light that looked like it belonged on a showroom. Gone was the pale blue Harold loved, the shutters he built himself one summer with sweat on his brow and sawdust in his beard. The lilac bush was gone. The old bench by the dock, gone too. My heart thudded once, deep and slow. There were cars in the driveway. I recognized Daniel's black SUV and Caroline's sleek hybrid. There was a third one, too. A rental, probably for the guests or vendors. They were here. I parked at the edge, out of sight from the windows. I didn't go up to the door. Not yet. Instead, I walked to the edge of the lake, my shoes sinking slightly into the damp earth. The dock had been redone, wider now, with clean planks and fresh varnish. I stood there, hands in the pockets of my coat, looking at the reflection of the sky on the water. And that's when I heard voices. Laughter. Caroline's sharp and crisp. Daniel's lower, warmer. Familiar in a way that still tugged at me. I turned slowly. Through the trees I could see them on the back porch. She held a wine glass. He was flipping through what looked like seating charts. There were folding chairs stacked nearby, and flower arrangements boxed on the steps. Workers were moving things, adjusting placements. It was happening. They were setting up for a celebration in a place I hadn't been allowed to step foot in for a year. And it was mine. I didn't make a sound. I just watched. At one point, Caroline walked toward the edge of the yard, gesturing with her hand, directing the placement of something. She was standing where my garden used to be, the one I planted every year with snapdragons and marigolds, because Harold said they looked like summer fireworks. She didn't see me. No one did. Good. I turned back, walked to my car, and opened the glove box. I kept a copy of the deed there. Not for any reason other than habit. Harold used to say, "Keep your important papers close even if it makes you look like a hoarder." I smiled faintly at the memory. I pulled out the folder, flipped it open, and stared again at the names. Mine. Harold's. Not Daniel's. Not Caroline's. I tucked the paper under my arm and walked up the drive. No one noticed until I stepped onto the porch. Daniel turned first. His face shifted, from surprise to awkwardness to something else. Something like guilt. "Mom," he said, setting the papers down. "We didn't expect—" "I can see that," I said. Caroline stood up straighter. "Sylvia," she said, voice cool. "We're kind of in the middle of setup. It's a bit chaotic." I held out the paper. "What's this?" she asked, though I could see she already knew. "The deed," I said. "To this property. Just a little reminder." Daniel's eyes darted between us. "Mom, I thought we agreed." "We didn't," I said calmly. "You never asked." The silence that followed was thick and immediate. One of the workers paused with a folding chair in his hands, sensing something. Caroline took the paper and skimmed it. Her jaw tightened. "So, what are you saying?" I didn't raise my voice. "I'm saying you're having a wedding on my land, in my house, without so much as a conversation. And now you're going to have one." Daniel stepped forward, putting a hand gently on Caroline's arm. Not to calm her, I think, but to make sure she didn't say something they couldn't walk back. His face wore that mask he used in business, the one I'd only seen a few times but recognized instantly. Neutral, calculated, careful. "Mom," he said, in a voice that reached for calm but carried edge underneath. "We didn't mean to exclude you. It was just, planning got complicated. And the invites." "You addressed the envelope to Charles and Emily Johnson," I interrupted. "Not to me. Not to Daniel's mother. Not even to family. Just them." He blinked, caught. "It was Caroline's idea to streamline the guest list," he said quickly. "We didn't think titles. You thought just enough to erase me," I said. Caroline let out a quiet breath through her nose. "Sylvia, it's a formality. Everyone knows you're his mother. The point is, you were invited." "To what exactly?" I asked, folding the deed back into my folder. "A ceremony held on my property, planned without a word to me, and attended by people I've never met because I was never introduced." Caroline's tone sharpened. "Are you trying to ruin this for Daniel?" Daniel flinched. "No," I said, voice steady. "I'm here to make sure you understand that I'm not invisible. This isn't about revenge. This is about respect. Something I've let slip for too many years." They were both quiet now. The man with the folding chair walked away slowly, pretending not to listen. "Legally," I continued, "you have no right to use this property for a private event without the owner's written consent. There's no lease, no usage agreement, which means if I wanted to, I could shut this whole thing down." Caroline's face flushed. She stepped toward me, her tone suddenly hushed, urgent. "You wouldn't." "I could," I said, "but I won't. Not today." Daniel's eyes softened. "Then why are you here, Mom?" "Because I'm tired of being left out. I came to tell you that this is the last time you get to make decisions about my home, my presence, or my worth without including me." Caroline looked like she wanted to speak, but didn't trust herself. I turned back to Daniel. "You're my son. I raised you. I gave you everything I had, including this house. I didn't sign it over, not yet, because some part of me hoped you'd still remember who it belonged to. Not just legally, spiritually." Daniel looked down at his hands. "We didn't mean to hurt you," he said quietly. "But you did," I replied. "And now I'm here. And I will be attending this wedding, not as a guest, not as an afterthought, and not with my name scribbled in last minute. I will be seated where a mother belongs." Caroline crossed her arms. "You could have just called." "No," I said. "If I had called, you would have smoothed it over, said it was a mix-up, promised a dinner later, patted my hand, and nothing would have changed." Daniel rubbed his temple. "So, what do you want?" I reached into my bag and pulled out a printed page. An agreement. It was simple. Use of property for one private event with acknowledgement of the owner and no transfer of rights. I slid it across the table. "I want you to sign this," I said, "and I want a new invitation sent to every guest. One that includes my name." Caroline looked like she was about to protest. Daniel stopped her. "She's right," he said softly. "We've been wrong. It stunned me. Not the words themselves, but how he said them. Not loud, not defensive, just quiet truth. Caroline stepped back. "Fine," she muttered. "We'll add your name." I picked up the folder. "And one more thing." They both looked at me. "I'll be staying here tonight, in the guest room, like I always used to." Caroline opened her mouth, then closed it. Daniel only nodded. "Of course, Mom." I stepped inside, past them, and into the house that still smelled faintly of pine and paint and something else. Something that belonged to me and Harold. I took my coat off, folded it neatly over the chair, and looked around. New curtains, new countertops. But the bones were still mine. I wasn't a guest. I was home. The guest room hadn't changed much, and that surprised me. They'd repainted the walls a soft gray, added sleek furniture. A platform bed, a small desk, a lamp with no switch, just a tap to turn it on. But on the far wall, high up on the shelf, they had left the old wooden boat Harold carved for Daniel when he was a boy. I stood there looking at it for a long time. Funny. They'd painted over everything else. But that little boat remained. I unpacked slowly. I hadn't brought much. A nightgown, a toothbrush, a sweater I kept folded just so. The envelope with the deed stayed in my bag, tucked beneath the zipped lining. It wasn't fear that made me keep it close. It was memory. Memory has weight, and mine had been carried too long in silence. Downstairs I heard voices. Low, tense. The kind couples use when they disagree but don't want the neighbors to know. I didn't listen. Not intentionally. Let them talk. Instead, I sat on the edge of the bed and stared out the window. The lake was still there, quiet and wide. The same lake Daniel had skipped stones across as a child, trying to beat Harold's record. I used to sit on the porch with a glass of lemonade and pretend not to count the skips. 21 was the record. Daniel hit 18 once. The pride on his face lit the whole yard. And now? Now he was a man who had forgotten how to look me in the eye when something mattered. I closed my eyes and let the silence wrap around me. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a woman waiting to be noticed. I felt like someone who had drawn a line. Later, I heard a knock on the door. I didn't rush to open it. Daniel stood there, hands in his pockets. "May I come in?" I nodded, and he stepped inside like a boy visiting the principal's office. I wanted to say, "I'm sorry," again. I waited. He looked around the room, at the boat, at the lamp, anywhere but at me. "I didn't think," he said, "about what it would mean to leave your name off, to let Caroline handle everything. I just wanted things to go smoothly." "And your mother complicated that," I said flatly. "No," he said quickly. "That's not what I meant." I let him squirm. He sat in the desk chair, the legs creaking. "I guess I've been letting the distance grow, one day at a time. I didn't plan it. It just happened." I nodded. "That's how most forgetting works. A little at a time, until you don't even notice who's gone." He looked up then. His eyes were tired, older than I remembered. "Do you hate me?" The question startled me. "No," I said. "I don't hate you." I paused, let the silence stretch. "But I don't trust you. Not yet." He nodded slowly. We sat like that for a while. Two people with years between them, some of it filled with love, some with fog. I thought he might say more. He didn't. When he finally stood to leave, he said, "You'll be at the rehearsal dinner tomorrow?" "I will," I said. "Caroline's parents will be there. She's not thrilled about all this." "I imagine not," I said. but I'm not here for her comfort." He didn't argue, just nodded and left. I sat by the window for a long time after that, watching the light fade behind the trees. That night, I made myself a cup of tea in the quiet kitchen and drank it slowly, one hand resting on the table like Harold used to do. I didn't need to say anything aloud. The stillness spoke well enough. I wasn't here to fight, but I wasn't going anywhere either. The next morning, the kitchen was already full of movement. A caterer stood near the fridge, checking a list on his clipboard. Someone else was setting wine glasses on the counter, one by one, as if handling glass figurines. Caroline was directing them all, barefoot, in a crisp blouse and a voice like polished steel. She didn't see me at first. I poured myself coffee quietly, waiting. When she finally did notice, her mouth tightened. Not quite a frown, not quite a smile. Just control. "Good morning, Sylvia," she said. "Did you sleep all right?" "Yes, thank you." She nodded once, then turned back to her list. "I hope you understand this is a stressful weekend. There's a lot to manage." "I understand perfectly." I took my coffee to the sunroom and sat where I used to knit, back when the place still smelled like cedar and not citrus-scented polish. Through the glass, I could see the florist arrive, hauling buckets of peonies. I watched her place them around the porch, directed by Caroline's gestures. Every now and then, someone glanced at the window. I saw my own reflection there. A small woman in a pale cardigan, hands wrapped around a ceramic mug. Invisible, and yet completely in the way. That was always the trick, wasn't it? To make someone feel like an obstacle without ever saying the words. Daniel didn't appear until noon. He looked tired, a little frayed. His tie was crooked. I wondered if he even noticed. "Hey, Mom," he said, ducking into the sunroom like a man seeking refuge. "You okay?" "I'm watching the transformation." He followed my gaze. "Yeah, Caroline's really good at that stuff." "Yes," I said. "She's very good at shaping spaces." He shifted awkwardly. "About tonight. The dinner. Caroline was thinking maybe you'd prefer to sit with some of the older guests. You know, where it's quieter." My smile didn't move past my lips. "Daniel, let me make something clear," I said, setting down my mug. "I didn't come here to be placed." He blinked. "I'll sit where I belong, with family, at your side, as your mother, not at some overflow table like a distant cousin." "I didn't mean it like that." "Yes, you did," I said. "And I don't blame you. It's easier to forget the people who made you, until they remind you." He looked down at his shoes. "I'm not here to cause trouble," I continued. "But I will not be hidden. Not anymore." He opened his mouth to say something, then seemed to think better of it. Instead, he nodded. "Okay." It wasn't brave. It wasn't heartfelt. But it was the first true agreement I'd heard from him in years. I stood, straightened my cardigan, and walked past him. In the hallway, I passed Caroline, who was frowning at her phone. I didn't stop. "You'll need to print new place cards," I said, without looking back. She didn't answer. That evening, the rehearsal dinner shimmered with intention. Every napkin folded like origami, menus printed with the couple's initials, a soft jazz trio playing in the corner, like someone had pressed a lifestyle ad into reality. The room quieted when I entered. Daniel came forward and took my arm, and for that, I gave him something close to a smile. He led me to the main table between him and his father-in-law. Caroline's eyes followed every step, tight and unreadable. People made polite conversation. Someone asked me where I got my blouse. I answered without giving away the fact that it was 20 years old. I didn't fumble. I didn't shrink. I belonged at that table, not because they allowed it, but because I said so. Later, during dessert, Carolyn raised a glass for a toast. She thanked everyone for coming, thanked her parents, thanked Daniel. She did not mention me, but I was already full. Not of food, not of praise, but of presence. And that, finally, was enough. The house was still when I crept down early the next morning. Not the quiet of peace, the quiet of pressure, like a stage just before the curtain rises. I made myself a piece of toast and sat by the window, watching the sun slide slowly across the lake. Today was the wedding. I had no illusions about what that meant for me. My name might be on the land. My hands may have built this family, this boy, this life. But to them, to most of them, I was an awkward presence, a loose thread, a woman who made things uncomfortable by refusing to vanish. And yet, I had slept well, for the first time in weeks, months maybe, because I had finally done what Harold used to call planting your flag. Last night, after everyone had gone to bed, I'd gone into the office and printed 2 copies of a short letter. One went into an envelope addressed to Daniel. The other I left unsigned, tucked into the kitchen drawer marked Household Shared. It was a simple statement. This house remains in the legal possession of Margaret Sylvia Johnson. Use of this property for personal or commercial events requires written consent. Any attempt to alter this agreement will result in immediate legal response. I didn't need a courtroom. I needed clarity. As I finished my toast, Caroline came in. She was still in pajamas, silk ones, pale pink, with slippers that looked more like props than clothes. Her face was scrubbed clean, younger this way, less curated. She didn't expect me. We stared at each other for a beat. Then she crossed to the kettle, filled it, and turned it on. The silence between us was flat. Finally, she said, "I know you think we've treated you badly." I raised my eyebrows. "Have you?" She didn't answer that. Instead, she stirred something in a mug. "I never meant to replace you. I just needed space." And Daniel followed my lead. Maybe he shouldn't have. Maybe that's on me. "Maybe?" I repeated. She turned around, cup in hand. "Look, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want today to go smoothly." "For you," I said. "For everyone," she snapped, then caught herself. "I'm not trying to argue." "Good," I said. "Then don't." She looked like she wanted to throw something, but instead, she just left. I stayed in the kitchen for a while, letting her silence settle like dust. At 10, a knock came on the front door. Not a delivery, a visitor. I opened it and found a woman about my age, maybe a bit younger. She wore a navy coat and held a clipboard. "Mrs. Johnson?" she asked. "Yes." "I'm Marcy, the coordinator. I'm here to oversee the setup. I just wanted to confirm where you'd like the family photos arranged." I blinked. "Excuse me?" "The family display. Caroline mentioned a few heirloom photos were going to be used. Wedding portraits, things like that." I stared at her. "I wasn't told anything about that," I said. Marcy looked genuinely confused. "Oh, I was told they were already here. Maybe stored somewhere?" I took a breath. "They are. I'll get them." I went into the storage closet by the study. Inside were 3 boxes. I opened the one with the yellow sticker, Harold's label. Inside, wrapped in tissue, were photos from our wedding. A photo of Daniel at 4, holding a wooden plane. one of me and Harold at the lake, squinting into the sun. I stood looking at them for a long time. Then I pulled out a frame that had always made me ache. Daniel's high school graduation. He was grinning, cap slightly crooked, and I had one arm around him, the other holding his diploma. It was one of the last times he looked at me like I was central to his world. I carried the box to the coordinator and said, "These are the real ones. You'll know where to put them." She smiled, gently. "Yes, ma'am. I think I will." By noon, the yard was a flurry of white chairs and lavender ribbons. Guests began to arrive by early afternoon. Cars pulled in one after another. Laughter, heels on gravel, camera shutters. Caroline's people, sleek, poised, talking fast and loud. I stood by the living room window and watched it all, and I waited for the moment when someone would try to move me aside. It didn't come, because I had already chosen where I would stand. And for the first time, it would not be at the edges. It wasn't until I saw the string quartet arrive that I realized how far they were willing to go to make the wedding appear perfect. Musicians in tailored black, stepping carefully across the gravel, instruments like delicate animals tucked in velvet cases. And still, no one had asked me anything. No one had knocked on my door, offered a seat, or asked if I needed help finding something to wear. Not Daniel, not Caroline, not even her parents, who, by now, must have known exactly who I was. So I did what I've always done. I dressed myself. I took my time, not to be elegant, but deliberate. A dark teal dress, modest and well-pressed. Stockings without a run. The pearl earrings Harold gave me on our 20th anniversary. And my shoes, the ones I wore to Daniel's college graduation. They pinched now, but they carried meaning. Downstairs, people were beginning to gather. Glasses clinked. Shoes clicked across hardwood. Someone laughed, high-pitched and unfamiliar. I descended slowly. I didn't want to rush this. At the base of the stairs, Caroline's mother stood in a lavender suit, holding a flute of champagne. She looked me over and blinked twice, polite but not warm. "You must be Sylvia," she said. "I must," I replied. She didn't offer her hand, just sipped. "We're so happy to be hosting here," she said, scanning the room. "You're not," I corrected gently. "I am." She gave a brittle laugh, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I do hope everything runs smoothly," she said. "It's such an important day." "For me too," I said, and walked past her. Daniel found me near the back porch. He looked nervous, like a boy caught doing something he couldn't explain. "You look nice, Mom." I gave a small nod. "You clean up well yourself." He fiddled with his cuff. "Listen, I know today isn't easy." "For who?" He looked up, met my eyes, then looked away. Let's get through the ceremony, okay?" "Of course," I said. "It's your wedding. We'll do it your way. One more time." He looked like he might say something else. He didn't. The officiant arrived around 2. The chairs filled quickly. People fanned themselves with printed programs. A few pointed at the old photo display near the edge of the dock, the one I'd supplied. I watched a young woman linger in front of the picture of Harold and me. She tilted her head, curious. She didn't know who we were. That was fine. She would learn. When the music began, I took my place. No one offered to escort me. I walked myself. Down the side aisle, straight to the front row, where a space had been left, awkwardly, almost as an afterthought. But it was mine. And I sat without asking permission. Caroline's father nodded at me stiffly. Caroline's mother did not. Daniel stood at the altar, hands folded, eyes forward. When Caroline came down the aisle, the crowd shifted, sighed, tilted phones and faces. She was radiant, of course. She knew how to be. But I watched my son. His jaw twitched. His eyes flicked to me once. I didn't smile. I didn't wave. I only looked back. Steady. Clear. The vows began. I heard them, but they passed through me like wind through reeds. Promises made in scripted language, in front of guests who would forget them by Monday. And when the officiant asked if anyone had cause to speak, the brief pause, the formality, no one moved. But I thought about it, just for a moment. I imagined standing up, holding the deed, and saying, "Actually, before you promise each other forever, maybe acknowledge who gave you the ground to stand on." But I didn't, because I wasn't here to interrupt. I was here to witness, to be seen. And when the rings were exchanged and the kiss was given and the crowd burst into polite applause, I didn't join in. I sat quietly, my hands folded in my lap, feeling the weight of history press against my ribs. It was done. They were married. And I was still here. The reception began like most do, a slow migration toward food, drink, and the illusion of togetherness. Servers in black passed around miniature toasts and salmon puffs. A photographer with a wide lens hovered near the dock, directing people into place. "Groom's parents, over here, please. Bride's family, next shot. Let's get the siblings." I watched him scan the crowd, looking for matches to names he didn't know. He never looked at me. I didn't move. I stayed near the house, by the table with framed photos and a small guest book that no one was signing. A pair of elderly women stood nearby, whispering. I didn't catch every word, but I heard enough. "Is that her?" I thought she wasn't invited. I thought the bride's parents owned the place. I looked them in the eyes and said, "It's my house." That shut them up. At some point, a young woman in a green dress, one of Caroline's friends, I think, approached with 2 flutes of champagne. She offered me one. "I don't drink anymore," I said, "but thank you." She hesitated, then sat beside me anyway. "I'm sorry, I don't mean to be rude, but are you the groom's mother?" "Yes." "You weren't in any of the family portraits." I nodded. "I know." She seemed genuinely uncomfortable. "That's kind of awful." I gave a small smile. "It's nothing new." She didn't know what to say after that. Few people ever do. Eventually, the music started. Soft, curated. The kind that signals sophistication, but makes no one want to dance. Daniel and Caroline had their first dance beneath strings of lights hung from the trees. He whispered something to her. She laughed too loudly. They looked beautiful, like an advertisement for a life they hadn't lived yet. After their dance, the DJ announced it was time for speeches. Caroline's father rose first. His speech was well rehearsed. A gentle roast of Daniel, a glowing ode to his daughter, a few sentimental remarks about finding family in unexpected places. He gestured toward the Johnsons, the Mr. and Mrs. from the invitation. I was not mentioned. Next came a bridesmaid. Then Daniel's college friend, an easy storyteller full of inside jokes and polished praise. Then the DJ said, "And now, if the groom's mother would like to say a few words." The air shifted. All heads turned. Daniel looked stunned. Caroline didn't move. Her mouth was fixed in a tight smile that did not touch her eyes. I stood slowly. My knees ached. The hem of my dress caught briefly on the edge of the chair, but I freed it with a small tug. I walked to the front, where the mic stood waiting. I didn't touch it. I didn't need amplification. I just looked out over the faces, some familiar, many not, and said, I wasn't supposed to speak today. There was a rustle, a few exchanged glances. I wasn't supposed to be here at all, actually. The invitation didn't include my name. The photos didn't include my face. But I came anyway. The silence deepened. Even the servers had stopped moving. I came because I raised this man. I fed him. I taught him how to tie his shoes and to speak the truth. I gave him space when he pushed and love when he pulled away. I gave him this house, and I gave him my silence. For too many years. Daniel's eyes were wide. He didn't move. I don't need applause. I don't need gratitude. But I will not be erased. Someone cleared their throat. No one else made a sound. I turned to Daniel. I hope you have a good marriage, I said. A real one. Not one that relies on pretending people don't matter. Because that trick, it doesn't hold. Then I nodded once, turned, and walked back to my chair. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. And when I sat down, I felt, for the first time in a long time, like myself again. No one clapped after I spoke. They didn't know whether they should. The DJ cleared his throat, said something about dinner being served shortly, and the music resumed. But softer now, more uncertain, like even the speakers didn't want to draw too much attention. I watched them try to recover. Caroline pulled Daniel aside. Her hand on his arm was tight, white-knuckled. They spoke in low voices. She glanced over at me once, quickly, then turned her back. Daniel didn't look at me at all. He just kept nodding, saying nothing. A few guests began to drift toward the buffet. I stayed seated. Eventually, a man I didn't know, one of Caroline's uncles, I guessed, approached and said quietly, "Well said, ma'am." I thanked him with a small nod. Most others avoided my gaze. That was fine. I didn't come for approval. I came for truth. And truth, as I'd learned, makes people uncomfortable, especially when you say it without raising your voice. When I finally stood to fix a plate, the caterer smiled at me, his eyes kind. "We've got a vegetarian section if you'd prefer," he said gently. "Thank you," I said, and chose what I liked without apology. I ate slowly, alone, at a table by the edge of the yard. No one joined me. That was expected. But it wasn't loneliness, not this time. It was peace. Across the lawn, Daniel moved between groups, shaking hands, posing for photos, laughing too loudly. Performance, not ease. Caroline stayed close to her parents. Every now and then her eyes flicked toward me. A flicker, then gone. Let them both sit with it. Let the discomfort settle in, like shoes a size too small. As the sky darkened and lanterns lit up one by one, people began to loosen. Wine helped. Music helped. Memory helped. Or blurred, depending on the guest. I didn't dance. Instead, I walked toward the dock and stood at the railing, looking out across the black water. The lake held everything: reflection, silence, age. It had seen more truth than any of them. Behind me, I heard footsteps. Daniel. He came up quietly, hands in his pockets. "You shouldn't have done that," he said. I didn't turn. "You mean speak? You embarrassed Caroline." I told the truth. He exhaled, sharp. "This was supposed to be our day." "No, Daniel. This was supposed to be yours, but you borrowed it. From me. And then you forgot to say thank you." He flinched. I turned then. "Look at me," I said. He did. "You let her plan a wedding on my property. You watched as my name disappeared. You let them place me like an inconvenience. And you said nothing. I didn't know how to fix it. Fixing it would have meant remembering me before the invitations were printed, not after the photos were taken. He looked away. I waited. Finally, he said, I didn't mean to hurt you. I know. Another pause. But you did. He nodded, slow. I'm sorry, Mom. It wasn't loud. It wasn't rehearsed. It barely reached the water. But it was the first true thing he'd said to me in years. We stood there, side by side, watching the water catch the lantern light like spilled gold. He didn't reach for my hand, and I didn't offer it. Some silences need to be held before they can be healed. The wedding began to dissolve the way all big events do. Not with a bang, but in quiet exits and forgotten plates of cake. Guests hugged, posed one last time, checked their watches. Some left shoes behind, others took centerpieces they weren't supposed to. By 10, the music had softened into background hum, the lights a little dimmer. No one asked me to help clean. I stayed seated on the porch, blanket over my knees, watching people leave the house I still legally owned. They moved like it belonged to them. Not with malice, just with that blind confidence people have when no one tells them otherwise. And I'd told them otherwise. Caroline passed me once, clipboard in hand, lips tight. She didn't stop. Her heels clicked down the steps, crisp and precise. I imagined she'd be drafting thank you notes before the last wine glass dried. Daniel lingered longer, saying goodbye, thanking people, avoiding me. That was fine. I didn't need more words. I needed something quieter, something that couldn't be printed on invitations or smoothed over in speeches. Later, when most of the guests had gone and the house was quieter again, I rose and returned to the guest room. I removed the pearls, folded my dress, sat at the desk with the lamp that still confused me, and took out a sheet of stationery. And I wrote. Not to Daniel, not to Caroline, to myself. I wrote what Harold would have said if he were here. You stood up. You didn't shrink. You spoke without yelling. You reminded them who built the house they're celebrating in. I wrote what I had wanted to say at every Thanksgiving I wasn't invited to. Every birthday call that went unanswered. Every Mother's Day card that never came. I was here. I mattered. I folded the letter, slipped it into an envelope, and tucked it into the drawer beside the bed. A small record. Not for them. For me. In the early morning, long before sunrise, I walked through the house barefoot. The kitchen smelled faintly of rosemary and wine. The sink was full. The counters cluttered. I didn't clean. I stepped into the living room where the framed photos were still arranged on the display table. Harold and me. Young Daniel. A family not yet fractured. I touched the corner of one frame, the one where Daniel grinned in his graduation cap, my hand on his shoulder. I stood there for a while, letting that younger version of him look back at me. The boy who hadn't yet learned to forget me, the boy I carried through everything. I'm still your mother, I whispered, even if no one says it out loud. Then I turned, left the photo where it was, and returned to bed. The house was mine. The night was mine. And what came next? That would be mine too. The morning after, the silence was different. Not empty, not tense. Settled. I brewed coffee while the house still slept. The cat, someone had brought a cat, probably one of the cousins, brushed against my ankle like it had always lived here. I let it. I didn't rush. Out the window, the lake was a mirror again. Everything reflected clearly. At 8, Daniel came downstairs. No tie, no jacket. Just his old flannel shirt, sleeves rolled up the way Harold used to wear his when sanding wood. For a second, I could almost see the boy in him again, the one who once asked me to teach him how to make scrambled eggs the real way, not the kind from school cafeterias. He looked tired, not from celebration, from the weight of what couldn't be undone. "Coffee?" I asked. He nodded. "Please." We sat at the table like we used to. 2 mugs between us, nothing too close. The cat jumped onto the windowsill and stared at us, judgmental and bored. Daniel was the first to speak. "I read your letter." I didn't react. He went on. "You wrote that you didn't need applause, that you just didn't want to be erased." I nodded. He looked down at his hands. "I think I did it without realizing, a little at a time. Caroline would say something, or not say something, and I'd let it slide. You sent gifts, called, and I told myself I'd call later." "I know," I said. "I didn't forget you." "Daniel," I said quietly, "that's exactly what forgetting looks like." He winced. We sat with that. "I'm not proud of it," he said. "Good," I replied. He looked up, startled. "If you were proud, it'd mean you didn't feel the loss." He nodded slowly. "I'm sorry, Mom. Really." This time, I believed him. Not because it was loud or teary or dramatic, because it came from the place truth always hides. Under the ego, beneath the polish. From the small, scared part of him that still needed to be forgiven. "I accept your apology," I said. His shoulders dropped, just a little. "But I'm not rushing back into anything," I continued. "This isn't a clean slate. It's a boundary, one I should have drawn long ago." He didn't argue. "And as for Caroline," I began. He held up a hand. "She won't apologize. Not easily." "I know. She sees strength as challenge, doesn't know what to do when someone doesn't bend." I sipped my coffee. "Then it's time she learns." He almost smiled. "You scared her yesterday." "Good." We sat a while longer, talked about small things, the roof leak, the lake levels, how the pine tree near the dock was leaning too far. And then quietly he said, "I'd like to visit more." "You can." "With notice," I added, "and with respect." "Of course," he said. I looked at him. This man who once held my hand at the dentist, who cried when his goldfish died, who called me Mama until he was 9, and saw someone I could meet again. Not the boy I missed. The man I was still deciding to let in. We stood. He reached for his mug, then paused. "You want to keep the photos up?" I considered that. "No," I said. "They serve their purpose." He nodded. "Want me to help take them down?" I almost said no, but instead I said yes. And we did, side by side, quietly, carefully. By midday, most of the guests had gone. The flower arches were dismantled, chairs folded and stacked near the porch. Someone had taken the leftover wine, though the cake, what remained of it, still sat in the fridge, untouched. The stillness felt earned. Daniel and Caroline were upstairs packing. They would leave that afternoon for a 3-day honeymoon. Somewhere coastal, minimalist, curated, like everything she touched. I didn't ask where. I didn't need to know. Instead, I moved through the house with intention. I straightened the living room, collected used glasses, removed the last of the tulle from the stair banister. I wasn't cleaning out of obligation. I was restoring, reclaiming. This space had been taken, turned into a stage. Now it was mine again. Just before 2, I heard footsteps on the stairs. Caroline appeared first. She looked tired, less polished, still beautiful, but in that strained way, like a photo overexposed. "Leaving soon?" I asked. She nodded. "Flight at 4. I waited. She didn't speak. So I did. Thank you for taking care of the house while I wasn't here. Her mouth tightened, then relaxed. We tried to keep it up. You removed the lilac bush. It was dying, she said too quickly. Daniel said it was fine. I let that sit. Then, you're not required to like me, Caroline, but you do have to respect me. She met my gaze. This time, she didn't flinch. I don't know how to be close to people like you, she said finally. People like me? Older women, strong ones. You look at me like you already know what I'm going to do. I didn't answer, because she was right. I was raised around control, she added. Everything needed to be managed, curated. I thought if I kept things neat, no one would notice the cracks. There's strength in cracks, I said. That's how the light gets in. She almost smiled. Almost. You've got the house, she said. The land, the history. I guess I felt like a guest here. Then you understand, I said quietly. Exactly how I've felt in my own son's life? A long silence passed between us. Maybe next time, she said, we try something different. Maybe, I said. Daniel came downstairs, suitcase in hand. He looked between us like he was afraid something had been said that couldn't be unsaid. But Caroline just slipped her arm into his and said, Ready? He nodded. At the door, Daniel turned. We'll call when we're back. I didn't make promises. I didn't reach out. I just said, drive safe. They left with 2 suitcases, a box of leftover favors, and whatever guilt they chose to carry. The door clicked shut behind them, and I was alone, not abandoned, not erased, alone like still water, like peace. I poured myself a cup of tea, walked out to the porch, sat in Harold's old chair. The house was quiet again, but not empty, full in a different way, mine. It's been 3 weeks. The chairs are gone. The last of the glitter from the reception has been swept off the porch. The yard has returned to itself. Wild at the edges, uneven in its rhythm, just the way Harold liked it. I haven't heard from them. Not Daniel, not Caroline. That used to hurt. Now it doesn't. Not the same way. They know where I am. They know what I said. And silence, when it follows truth, is not rejection. It's consequence. I go about my days the way I used to, watering the porch plants, sorting mail at the kitchen table, walking down to the dock with a book I barely read. The cat still comes around. I started feeding it, named it Ruth. Yesterday, I framed the deed, hung it in the hallway, not out of spite, out of memory, out of fact. People like to forget mothers. It's easy. We make forgetting comfortable. We give without asking. We step back to make space. We fold ourselves smaller so others can stretch. And when we finally speak, when we finally say no more, they call us difficult, bitter, dramatic. Let them. I didn't stand up to be liked. I stood up because I had bent far enough. There's a new lilac bush planted by the porch now, not in the same spot, a little off to the left. The soil's not right yet, but I'll tend it. Give it time. Things return if you let them. The phone might ring one of these days. They might visit, or they might not. That choice is theirs now. But the shape of my life no longer waits for them to fill it. And if someone asks, if anyone ever dares to question where I was in the photos, or why my name was missing from the invitation, I'll tell them this. I was here. I stayed. I watched. And when they forgot who held them first, I reminded them, not with fury, not with shame, but with truth. And a woman who tells the truth softly and without permission is the one they never see coming. let them learn.